Story 1. It is one of those sports that is not as satisfying to watch on television as it is in person. Actually being at a race and feeling your whole world shake as the cars go running by is quite an adrenaline rush. Story 2. I watched it for more than 30 seconds for the first time ever yesterday. I didn't get it before, but now I do. The track isn't complex, but because the speed is constant, the pack of cars is incredibly tight, flying around at nearly 200 miles per hour. It's like a constant knife edge. A drop of a tire onto the marking lines could mean a small swerve or a massive crash. The aerodynamics of being in a tight pack is interesting too. Story 3. I have always wondered why rally sport is not more popular than National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing. It is more like where National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing got its start with bootlegging. If they did racing in mountain downs like they do throughout Europe, come on, that would be amazing. Story 4. Turning left isn't less interesting than turning both ways. What matters is the quality of the racing. National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing cars can race closely and make overtakes throughout the race. At any moment, there is jeopardy for almost every driver. The appeal only exists if you know the strategy, characters, and the teams. Without that, it's just watching cars drive around. Pass is meaningless. If you know all the drivers, where they stand in the year's racing, how their teams work, and the strategy, it's a lot more fun. There is a lot going on with when and what they pit for. You lose time going in, but hopefully can leave with a faster car than the other driver who didn't pit. There's a lot more happening that you miss if you haven't learned a bit. Story 5. I feel like there is probably a depth to it that the uninitiated do not understand, including me. You can do that with anything though. What is the deal with basketball when they just throw the ball into a hoop? Story 6. The difficulty and subtleties of oval racing are often lost on road racing fans. Setting the car up becomes really important, and the cars are asymmetrical, which makes it very difficult. A road race car is pretty neutral and the same left to right, while an oval car will have very different weight distribution and even different weight springs left to right. Negative camber on one side and positive camber on the other. Caster split. Tire stagger. It isn't straightforward at all. The National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing also has tremendous depth of talent in the field. Half the field has a legitimate chance at winning. They also run road courses. National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing champions are among the best drivers in the world. Oval racing has a long history in the United States. In the early days, a series would travel from town to town racing at the fairgrounds, where there was almost always a horse track and grandstands. Oval dirt racing has never gone away. Story 7. I am not a NASCAR guy, but I have heard this question before, and it makes no sense at all. It feels like it is a silly question people just repeat because they think it is clever. Most racing has at least some iteration that uses oval tracks. Horses, track and field, dogs, camels, bicycles, motorcycles, etc. Sure, there are road courses and marathons, but it is not like NASCAR is unique in its use of an oval track. I have never heard this same question or criticism for any of the dozens of other sports that use an oval track. Story 8. Every sport is pointless. That's part of what makes something a sport. What is the appeal of watching a bunch of adults trying to hit a ball with a stick? What is the appeal of watching people kick a ball around a patch of grass? Story 9. Turning left is only a small part of what is taking place. Passing in tight areas, drafting, and the mechanics in the pits. I am not even a fan, but I appreciate that there's more to it. Do you like tennis? Basically, it's just hitting a ball back and forth. Let's not even talk about the basics of golf or billiards. Story 10. Car go vroom. There's also pit strategy, which includes having to plan for the inevitable cautions, pack racing, where you have to work with fellow racers to push you up the field, and the driver's stories and rivalries. Plus, it's a lot more accessible than, say, Formula One, where the base tickets are very expensive and won't even get you into a meet and greet or a paddock tour. The overall NASCAR culture is more down to earth. I do have my issues with NASCAR as a motorsports fan, but overall, it's still a very compelling sport. Story 11. If you use simple terms like this, you can make anything sound boring. What's the point of riding a roller coaster? It's just sitting in a seat. Story 12. It's been described as chess on wheels. Any mistakes you make in preparation before the race to the first few laps will have a cascading effect on your performance in the race against better prepared teams. Story 13. It's more technical than just turning left all the time. The cars need to be tuned properly, and there are other cars piloted by other people that can, and do, act unpredictably while traveling at high speed. That is the challenge. Story 14. NASCAR cars do not even have a speedometer or anti-lock braking system. The entire time the car is in a corner, it is being balanced at the limit by a skilled driver with no aids or assistance in a tightly packed group of cars at ridiculous speeds. The winners are separated by their skill and tactics, not the technology of the car. It is one of the few motorsports where contact is expected. Teammates will literally go bumper to push each other down the straights at 200 miles per hour. Opponents will use a bump and run to push the other driver high in the corner so they can pass low, and literally scraping by other cars is common. It is incredible to see in person. Most importantly for me, you can see everything going on. It all happens right in front of you, and you can follow any driver around the track. I find that far more enjoyable than watching cars whip by one section of track and having no clue how my favorites are doing for the rest of the lap. Story 15. What's satisfying about reading books? It's just ink on paper. What's satisfying about sculptures? It's just lumpy stone. What's satisfying about video games? It's just pixels bumping about. What's satisfying about basketball? Just tall kings and queens bouncing balls. All recreation is just something people find enjoyment in. They are all some kind of community, strategy, or action that draws people in. Story 16. Loud, fast, and you can see the cars on the track the entire time. A lot of car races, you see the cars for about a quarter of a second every 5 minutes as they whiz by. Story 17. Well, the thing about sports is, if you have to wonder why it's fun, then it's probably not for you. I'm a huge car fan. I could tell you a million things I like about the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, even though I am not a diehard fan, but you wouldn't get it. I've had many people ask me why I am so invested in Formula One when it's just millionaires driving around a weirdly shaped circle, while the same people go watch millionaires run around trying to put a ball in a net. To each their own. Story 18. Growing up with Formula One and World Endurance Championship, I look down on the oval racing of the United States, but it demands a different kind of racing skill set, and there is just as much depth to the strategy and overtaking. While not National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing, the Indianapolis 500 has become a real highlight of the racing year for me. Story 19. NASCAR is like grappling. Unless you know what they are doing, it will just look like nothing to you. It is a chess game at the highest speed where cars jockey for positions while driving only inches from each other. Story 20. I started drinking at 6 in the morning. We're here now. I don't know what time it is, but I'm rolling deep. And those cars are going really fast and really to the left, son. They're going fast and to the left. Yes. Story 21. I'm a big NASCAR fan, and the excitement is that even though most of the tracks in the series are ovals, they all have different elements that make the racing different. The racing is different between short tracks, intermediate mile and a half tracks, super speedways, and road courses, and by every individual track, which also affects pit strategy. Race teams normally have a good sense of when to fuel the cars, but track conditions affect when teams need to change tires, and race circumstances make deciding when to pit a lot more complicated than it seems during the breakdowns they do just before the start of the race. As far as the racing itself, it's hard enough to handle a car going 185 miles per hour or more, especially going into the turns. But imagine having to keep your very unstable car under control while also fighting your way to the front of the field. That's the challenge, and that's why the racing is so good. I'll admit it's definitely more satisfying in person for most tracks, though Daytona, Talladega, and Atlanta are exciting anywhere. But the strategy and challenge of driving makes it really fun. Story 22. There is so much more going on than just turning left, though. Let me explain it as best I can without writing a lengthy essay on the topic. NASCAR is somewhat like chess as an analogy. First, let me explain the structure of the league and the season. You have three main manufacturers in the NASCAR Cup Series: Toyota, Ford, and Chevrolet. For example, let's look at Team Penske. Team Penske races Ford cars, and their team consists of 1. Number 22, Joey Logano. 2. Number 12, Ryan Blaney. 3. Number 2, Austin Cindric. In any given race, all three drivers are trying to win. The way NASCAR's season is structured, if you win a regular season race, you automatically earn a spot in the playoffs. You also collect points throughout the season. Each race is broken up into 3 stages. In a 300-lap race, let's pretend the race is split 100/100/100 for each stage. Wherever you are placed at 100 laps will award you season points. Then points are given after stages 2 and 3 as well. Now let's say during a race numbers 22 and 12 are close to one another. They can and will work together if they can make it work. Ford cars are known for bump drafting really well. So number 12 will be going 200 miles per hour on a straightaway with number 22 in front. Because number 12 has less wind resistance, they are able to go slightly faster than their teammate. So he will come up behind the number 22 and literally bump his car, giving him a little boost while still taking advantage of the lack of air resistance. That is how teams can work together. Cars can also hinder other cars on the track with side drafting and various other methods. Essentially, what they can do is get beside someone off their rear quarter panel, and it will actually slow them down. If you are trying to gain position, this is one way to do it. Or a driver can bump a person in front of them from a different team, then link up with their teammate to draft by the lead car. There is also the pit cycle. Let's say a track like Daytona is being raced. With full fuel, the cars can go around 40 to 44 laps. The cars in the front of the pack are usually pedal to the floor. As you go back a few rows, those cars can keep up with the ones going flat out while using less throttle, and therefore they are saving fuel. So in a 100-lap stage, if you can stretch your fuel to 45 or 46 laps, you can potentially time your pit stop to your advantage. However, if you stay out, now you are at the front of the pack and using more fuel. Story 23. I'm a massive fan. I attend multiple races every year, traveling hundreds of miles for them. That being said, when reduced to the most basic description, it can sound boring. It can be boring to watch sometimes, like anything can, but it can be so much less boring knowing the intricacies of the sport. It's always much less boring in person if you always find watching it boring. The sounds, smells, sights, and crowd frenzy add a level of excitement that anyone would get hyped for. The engineering and technology to gain the slightest of advantages is impressive when you learn about them. The moves to set up a pass are amazing when you learn the chess they are playing on track. Sometimes it's psychological games they are playing by placing their car in certain positions and then changing their positions to set up a move. Sometimes the track changes grip, so the first person to change their line gains speed. The mid-race changes to the car in the pits can cause the car to drive better, and they are usually changes that are made in under 10 to 15 seconds. Also, if you see what a driver's field of vision is, you would understand how important a spotter is to help them drive. There are so many other things that go on that can make it exciting, but it's also not for everybody, and that's okay. If you want to be a casual viewer, sometimes it's just going to be boring. Sometimes, though, like last week and this coming week, it will be exciting even to a casual viewer. Story 24. You can make any sport sound boring when you reduce it like that. Football is just people running around making each other fall to the ground. Formula 1 is just racing without the items. These cars get literal centimeters away from each other, and it's not a sprint but a marathon. There is also teamwork and team strategies that happen. Also, a lot of the drivers get an ego, so watching them get mad at each other is fun. If I recall correctly, Kyle Busch is one of the guys that can be difficult. Story 25. It seems simple and the concept is, but it's not easy. There is a ton of strategy, positioning, mind games, bumping and rubbing, picking the right lane to be in, taking the lead at the right time, and so on. I also thought it was just turning left until I started simulation racing and did a few oval races. The amount of skill and strategy involved was illuminating. Story 26. I'm not a sports guy, but you can pretty much make any sport sound boring like this. Football is just running back and forth while trying to hit the guy holding the ball. Soccer is just kicking a ball back and forth. Chess is just moving pieces on a board. The people who like auto racing enjoy the action and get into it in a way that the rest of us simply do not. That, or they are just hoping for a crash. Story 27. What is the appeal of drag racing when they are just basically going straight all the time? Different people like different disciplines. For oval racing, there are different strategies with fuel, tires, gearing, and the draft. A car good in traffic might be too slow running solo on the track. Maybe it has the gearing to go faster in the draft, but without the draft, it doesn't have the power to utilize the gearing for a higher top speed. Going slower but using less fuel can mean fewer pit stops. You don't want to go too slow where you lose too much time and can't make it up by doing fewer fuel stops, though. Going slow can also mean less wear on the tires. There are so many variables, and that's the fun in watching and keeping track of different cars doing different things. Some of these strategies also apply to road and street courses.